Hello, world. Good morning, namaste, and Nisam Bulavinaka from a very wet Sydney. I'm Sashi Singh, and welcome once again to Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook and on YouTube. In episode 26 this week, we will shortly meet our chief guest, Mr. John Samy, former Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Economic Development and Planning, and as head of the Department of Trade, Industry and Tourism, as well as the chairman of the Prices and Incomes Board and the architect of the Fiji People's Charter for Change, Peace and Progress. Mr. John Samy will be discussing with me the work that went into the People's Charter, as well as what triggered the death of what could have been a people's document that could have ensured sustainable democracy and good and just governance. We will also discuss matters with John Samy that are prevalent in Fiji today. I hope wherever you are well settled in to enjoy another couple of hours of an enlightening interview with my chief guest, Mr. John Samy. As always, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with John with as many interested people as possible, and to ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page and follow us as well. If you are joining us for the very first time, a big welcome to you. There have been a number of new followers, new guests joining us this week, and to you, a special welcome on Sashi Singh's Talking Point. To our regulars, our milestone followers, and our top fans, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Welcome to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook and YouTube. As always, we begin our first SSTP program in July with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and Australia. Nikhil, welcome to SSTP. A very good morning to you. It's a wet one out there.
Good morning, Sashi. Indeed, torrential rain, and we're just keeping warm and dry.
Yeah, well, keep dry. That's the order of the day. Let's get straight into your segment, Nikhil. Just a week after we reported a government minister lecturing a group of devotees at a temple in Lautoka, the Attorney General has been accused of an implied threat against school teachers. The Fiji Labour Party has strongly denounced the Attorney General's statement. What's going on here?
Well, Sashi, in last Sunday's episode, we reported that the Employment Minister Pravin Bala told a group of Hindu devotees at a temple in Lautoka that in order to maintain the current level of political stability, they should take steps to ensure that they continued sitting in peace and harmony. They should take steps to ensure they could continue sitting in peace and harmony. In the days following, the Attorney General, who has been moving around the country quite a bit, he has said, while opening a hall at the Nalovo Sangam School in Nandi, he said the government will improve the working conditions of teachers, I quote, of teachers who aren't politically motivated. So teachers who aren't politically motivated. The Fiji Labour Party leader Amanda Chowdhury has called Kayum's statement, I quote, silly. He said, this is an absolute silly statement. What on earth does he mean by those who aren't politically motivated? And how does he intend to carry out this policy? There is also an implied threat here to teachers who may have political leaning towards other parties than the Fiji First. Chowdhury said a teacher or anyone else for that matter has a constitutional right to freedom of political choice. He went on to say, Sashi, any policy or practice based on political leanings will clearly be unconstitutional, Sashi.
All right. There's a lot more happening in Fiji, Nikhil. Former Fiji First Government Member of Parliament Whip Ashnil Sudhakar has alleged that the Bainimarama government is a one-man show and that this can never be good for any country. What's on that front?
Yes, Ashnil Sudhakar was a minister in the Bainimarama government. In fact, he was Minister of Lands and Mineral Resources. And in addition to that, he was the chair of or chair for the Public Accounts and Justice Committees. You'd recall Sashi in 2018. It was Sudhakar who said, "quote Prime Minister Vorengen Bainimarama is Fiji's messiah. He is the only person who is saving Itoki land." And is the only person who can save every person in Fiji. Now, Sashi, Sudhakar clearly has now a very different view of the Prime Minister and the Fiji First Government. Fiji Village has reported that while speaking at a National Federation Party meeting in Moto in Ba, Sudhakar claimed that the government is being run by the Attorney General and the Prime Minister, Bainimarama, is, quote, just sitting idle. Sudhakar claims the Prime Minister is only reading out whatever is written in his speeches, and as a former Parliamentary Standing Committee Chairman for Public Accounts and the Justice, the former Fiji First MP claims he had to send the reports to Sayed Qayyum, the Attorney General, before they were tabled in Parliament. Now, this is a very serious allegation, Sashi, where the independence of such committees are called into question with such an allegation that's made by Sudhakar, where everything has to go through a vetting process, if I can call it, to the Attorney General before they're tabled in Parliament. Sudhakar went on to say that those who speak the truth are out. Now, Ashnil Sudhakar was terminated from his position. He was sacked as the Minister for Lands and Mineral Resources in March 2020, following some allegations of sexual harassment and his refusal to resign as a Member of Parliament. He has denied these allegations, Sashi.
Yes, indeed. Just as an aside, it has been suggested that SSTP bring Ashnil Sudhakar on the program, and I will do so as long as he agrees to. And one of the questions will be, what happened on the 9th floor when they went down into a lockdown? Moving on, Nikhil, it appears the supervisor of elections, Mohammed Saneem, received some lectures on how to serve legal notices last week after he had accused the Fiji Labour Party of not cooperating with the Fiji Elections Office. Tell us more.
Yes, Sashi, this matter stems from the statement made by former Fiji Labour Party Member of Parliament Harun Ali Shah at a FLP rally in Lautoka, where he alleged that the government tender processes were not above board. Saneem, following discussions with the government tender board, said Shah's statement was, I quote, manifestly false. But Harun Ali Shah has remained defiant and he said he stands by his statement. The supervisor of elections then issued a notice directing Shah to correct his statement by a certain deadline. And that deadline, from my understanding, was Thursday, 5 p.m. last week, Sashi. The Fiji Elections Office tried to impose on the Fiji Labour Party to serve the Elections Office notice to Shah. When this failed, the supervisor of elections said the Fiji Elections Office will now be taking steps to directly serve the notice issued to the representative of the FLP, Harun Ali Shah, requiring him to correct his statement issued earlier during a campaign rally of the FLP. Saneem said they have had to do this because Mahendra Chaudhry from the Fiji Labour Party refused to cooperate in serving the notice to his own party representative, despite having his full context and details and also having allowed the person to speak at the FLP rally. Saneem said it is quite unfortunate that the Fiji Labour Party fails or refuses to carry out an important function under law. Now, Sashi, being a lawyer, it came out as quite embarrassing, one would say, for Saneem to be reminded of how legal notices should be served. Here's what the Fiji Labour Party has had to say in response. Chaudhry said, Fiji Labour Party does not act as a bailiff for the Fijian Elections Office. Any notice of legal nature should be served directly on the person concerned and not through a third party. As a lawyer, Sanim should know that. The notice is personal to Mr. Shah and was issued by the Supervisor of Elections. It is thus his responsibility to have the notice personally served on Mr. Shah. It is not for the Fiji Labour Party to do his job, Sashi.
Legal Studies 101. That's all I'll say, Nikhil. Legal Studies 101. The Attorney General has filed court action against prominent Suva lawyer Richard Naidu, who is widely rumored to contest in this year's general elections under the National Federation Party banner. What can you tell us, noting specifically that the matter is now before the courts?
Well, I've relied on the Fiji Times article, Sashi, which reports that contempt of court proceedings have been issued against Richard Naidu by the Attorney General, claiming that one of his social media posts ridiculed a High Court judge. Leave to issue the proceedings was granted to Mr. Sayed Qayyum by the High Court on Monday, the 27th of June. The case concerns a Facebook post by Mr. Naidu in February this year, in which he included an excerpt of a court judgment. The judgment contained two references to the word injection. Mr. Naidu's post was alleged to have said, and I quote, "Maybe our judges need to be shielded from all this vaccination campaigning. I'm pretty sure all the applicant wanted was an injunction." According to Mr. Sayed Qayyum, the post sought to ridicule the presiding judicial officer and the Fijian judiciary as a whole. The Attorney General further said the post sought to bring into disrepute and lower the reputation of the presiding judicial officer and the administration of justice in Fiji, and invite and encourage viewers of the post to cast aspersions against expatriate judicial officers. Now, the case will be called in the High Court at midday on the 8th of July, which is a Friday. Now, in a statement issued yesterday, Mr. Naidu said the Attorney General's application would be defended. He said, and I quote, "In view of the fact that the matter is now before the court, I am unable to comment further until the case is disposed of," Sashi.
That is one case we will all be following with great interest. Yes, the words were indeed injection, and the other word was injunction. Let's leave it there for now. Closer to home, Nikhil, you reported last week about the controversy surrounding the appointment of former New South Wales Deputy Premier John Barilaro as the state's Trade Commissioner to the Americas. Do you have any update on this?
I do, Sashi. The ABC has reported that the former New South Wales Deputy Premier Barilaro has decided to withdraw from his role as the state's Trade Commissioner to the Americas. Mr. Barilaro's appointment to the position, which is based in New York, comes with a $500,000 annual salary package, which was confirmed early this month. The recruitment process has been the subject of an intense media scrutiny, as well as two separate inquiries at Macquarie Street. Now, the former Deputy Premier has told Investment New South Wales that his position has become untenable and is a distraction for the government. He said in a statement, and I quote, "It is clear that my taking up the role is now untenable and that the amount of media attention this appointment has gained, I believe my appointment will continue to be a distraction and not allow this important role to achieve what it was designed to do, and thus my decision. I stress that I've always maintained that I followed the process and look forward to the results of the review." The CEO of Investment New South Wales, Amy Brown, said that Mr. Barilaro notified her of his intention to withdraw from the role, effective immediately, Sashi.
And we just don't seem to be completely free from the threats of the pandemic just yet. Australia's Health Minister Mark Butler says a third wave of Omicron infections is on the way. What can you tell us about this?
Sashi, I guess very early days, but I picked this up from the Guardian Australia. But what is being talked about now is that after announcing a major review of COVID-19 vaccine purchases on Friday morning last week, the Federal Health Minister said that a third wave of the COVID variant Omicron infections was on the way. Now, the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration is considering an application from vaccine manufacturer Moderna for a new COVID 19 booster shot that targets the Omicron variant B4.1 as well as the original Wuhan strain of the virus. But specialists and experts in the medical field have cautioned against waiting too long for a premium vaccine, saying that a fourth booster shot of the current vaccine could be more effective if rolled out sooner. Sashi, I think this is something that we'll have to follow quite closely as we see further developments in this space.
Indeed, because this morning's news also covered the fact that New South Wales alone, there are fears that Omicron is going to be spreading very, very rapidly. Nikhil, once again, thank you very much for your contribution today. As always, nicely presented. Look forward to seeing you in the next program. Do take care and safe travels.
Thank you very much, Shashi.
Take care now. God bless. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. As I say, Fijians want to know. Please like and follow the SSTP page if you have not done so. I have an important announcement at this juncture to share with our viewers. Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, recognizes that questioning, constructive arguments, and opinions are part of conversation. But posts with aggressive personal attacks, profanity, name-calling, swearing, defamatory nature, and/or threatening will be removed immediately, and offenders will be blocked from being part of the SSTP program. Let's observe these rules and enjoy the program. Now it's time on SSTP to meet our chief guest. Our chief guest is Fiji born and bred, but is now a citizen of New Zealand and lives in Auckland. He is an independent public policy and development management professional with extensive experience in the public sector, as well as with multilateral, international institutions covering economic policy and planning, public policy analysis, and strategy development. While in Fiji, our chief guest served in the public service sector for 15 years, including as Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Economic Development and Planning, and as head of the Department of Trade, Industry and Tourism, and concurrently served as the chairman of the Prices and Incomes Board. In 2008, he served as the head of the Technical Secretariat of the National Council for Building a Better Fiji, and was appointed by His Excellency, the President of Fiji, to formulate the Fiji People's Charter for Change, Peace and Progress. With that as a background, it is my pleasure to welcome our chief guest, Mr. John Samy, to episode 26 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. John, good morning, Bula, and kia ora to you.
And the same to you, Sashi.
How are you this morning? I hope you are well.
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, I've been looking forward to this interview, John, because there's a lot to discuss regarding the People's Charter. But before that, let me just try and make some adjustments. We've got feedback coming through. All right, let's pursue. But before that, let me find out a lot more about you, as I usually do. I like to begin at the very beginning. So please do tell us, John, where were you born?
I was born in Suva.
So you're a K-Suva fellow?
Well, I was born there because my parents were in Lautoka,
Right.
but they decided to go to Suva where my grandmother was to give birth to me there. So after birth, we went back to Lautoka. So I am actually Suva born, but Lautoka bred.
All right,
Lautoka.
okay.
I'm K Lautoka.
So in all essence, you're a K-Lautoka.
Yeah.
John, how would you describe your early formative years?
It was marked by a lot of struggle in the family because my father worked as a locomotive driver in the sugar mill, Fiji sugar mill, and half the year when the crushing season closed down, most of the time he would be unemployed, and he would go pillar to post looking for ways and means of getting some income for us to be able to have food on the table. And my mother, because we were a large family, I was the eldest of 8 siblings. My mother was extremely hardworking, and she would do a number of things to supplement the income of my father, which was very low income. So I would like to mention that, because that involved a lot of struggle. But what was also very important in my bringing in that family situation was that both of my parents inculcated certain values, one of caring, of sharing, and they also recognized the importance of education. Even though neither of them had been to school, they did not know how to learn, read or write. To the children, they put a lot of priority emphasis on education. And that was very important for me in terms of my future as a person from Fiji.
Now, who would you say was the earliest influence in your life?
Other than my parents, in the area where we lived, in the low lines, coolie lines, every Sunday the church people, Methodist Church, would come to hold Sunday school. And my family were Hindus, and I used to avoid being trapped into going to Sunday school. But one day I decided to go to see what it was all about. And then I got very deeply involved in that. And I used to begin to take Sunday schools myself. And I was quite an active member of the Methodist Church. And later, when I was at university, I became president of the Fiji Student Christian Movement. I went several times overseas to attend World Student Christian Federation meetings. And so those were formative years for me. And I also developed a very strong interest in development by the time.
But before that, my question was, who was the earliest influence in your life? Who would you say was that?
Oh, so the reverend in the church was the other one I wanted to mention. I should have mentioned
All right.
that, other than the
Okay.
parents. Yes.
All right, John. Now, if I asked you to describe your earliest memory, what would that be?
Oh, there are quite a few, but I'll mention one in particular. At a very early age, I used to accompany my father in the evenings to go out to do the ndina, with a benzene lamp, spears. So he would carry the spear, and I would be right behind him carrying the bag for him to put the fish and the prawns and the crabs he would catch. And the memory that I share with a lot of people is that one of those evenings, he speared a nangari, a crab, mud crab, very large, the largest I'd ever seen then. Until today, that remains the largest size crab that he caught. It was amazing.
Would have been very impressive for you to see Dad do that.
Yes.
Because
You
fathers are our role models.
Yes.
Wonderful. Now, I've read your book, and we'll discuss your book in a while. Coming through what you have described as severe poverty-driven struggles, how important was education in your life, and was it something that you were driven to, or was it something that your parents encouraged you to pursue?
No, parents encouraged, but I applied myself quite seriously to education. And in fact, in Natambua Primary School, in the final year, I was awarded the best and the brightest child of the school, which was interesting, because that uplifts you, and you get more motivated to carry on studying hard and so on. So I did that and went to Natambua High School. And since you mentioned this, if I may, there were two very important turning points in my life at an early age.
Yes, I was just going to ask you that because you did write in the book that there were two critical turning points. Now, as you have alluded to it, what were these two events?
Yes. In Form 6, in those years, normally you sit for the university entrance in the 5th year. But the particular year, 1967, we were guinea pigs. We were made to sit the university entrance exam a year earlier. And when the results came out, I failed by about three marks.
Mhm.
And I had been on a sugar company scholarship that enabled me to go to Natambua High School. And I wanted to go back the following year to continue and sit again the university entrance. And the fees, if I may say so, was around $10 at the time. But my parents couldn't afford that. So I went around trying to raise that money, and I could not. Even the head of the Methodist Church did not give me that amount of money. He said, "You go and look for a job," he said. So I then decided to go to the sugar mill and to talk to the supervisor of my father, who was a Australian white person, Mr. Moores. And I had to walk around that office outside about 4 or 5 times to muster the courage to go in, to face him, and to be able to talk to him. And when I started, he was listening. And when I mentioned that, I should really be studying for that entrance exam this year, but not last year, and so on. So he picked the phone, called the principal of the school, and said, "I've got this young John Samy here in front of me, is saying this, that. Is that so?" And the principal confirmed that. And he put the phone down and he said, "Young man, you are going back to school." So if he had not agreed to revive the scholarship, I would have gone looking for work and I would not have been able to continue studying. So that was one critical turning point at age 17. Now, the following year, when you sit the exam, you also put in applications for work. And so I had set for the UE exam, then I had applied to the sugar company for a field officer position, and I had also applied to the Bank of New South Wales, now Westpac, for a bank officer job. Before the results came out, I was offered a job by the Bank of New South Wales. And soon after, I got a response from government offering me a scholarship to go to the University of the South Pacific. Now, I was in a serious dilemma what to do, because being the eldest son, now with the offer of a job, if I went and worked, I'd be able to bring money and supplement my father's income and help improve our living situation.
Mhm.
But I really wanted also to go further studies, to go to university. One evening, I sat down with both my parents and I started this way by saying to them, "Look, I've got a job, I can work and bring money, but I've also got a scholarship to be able to go and do further studies." And as if in one voice, both of them said to me, "Son, Munna," they used to call me, "Munna, you go and study, we will manage." And that was a very critical turning point, because they knew nothing about tertiary level education and all that, but they valued education and they let me go and continue further studies. I went to USP, and my life did turn in a dramatic way for the better.
It's amazing you talk of those two critical turning points. That first point that you mentioned, it seems that some greater guiding light was guiding you towards Mr. Morse's office, because for the life of me, I can't imagine a young Indian boy having the courage to enter a white colonialist supervisor's office to plead his way for further education. You did well, John. And as I said, it seems there was a
Yeah.
guiding light on your shoulders that day. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think I'd agree. Mhm.
All right, let me briefly discuss your professional career with you. After completing your arts degree, majoring in economics and sociology, you joined the civil service as a planning officer in the Central Planning Office. This was around 1972. In just a short span of 8 years, you were appointed the Director of Economic Planning. How was this experience for you? Because you were quite young at that time. How was it?
It was incredible. And you have to think on your feet and live and learn, basically. And I enjoyed the job greatly. And also what had happened was interesting, because when I became the director of economic planning, Aquila Sabu, who's no longer with us, he had left to join Air Pacific. And when he left, by that time, the macroeconomic framework for the next 5-year plan should have been ready. And this was May, June of that year in 1980. And I was in a situation what to do. Should I go and talk to Prime Minister? Was the minister at the time, Ratumara, and say to him that we would not be able to get this thing done this year. We'll have to extend. And so before even doing that, I decided to call a meeting of all the staff early morning, and we sat and we discussed. And in the first round, when I put the matter to a vote, all of them said, no, it's not possible for us to do this. You, as the head of the planning office, go and tell the Prime Minister it cannot be done. We carried on discussing, we carried on talking. By late afternoon, around 6 p.m., when we took another vote, they all agreed, let's do it. It's a major challenge. And so we worked very hard. We used to put in the hours, and we got it done. And there's some important lessons I learned, both in a managerial role. You've got to set the example. You cannot expect others to do things when you don't do what you are supposed to do. And I've always been a hard driver, and I drive myself also very hard.
Well said, because you got to lead from the front if you want others to follow. Now, John, after 3 years after this appointment, you were appointed the Permanent Secretary for Economic Development and Planning. Again, an important appointment, again, at a very young age. Now, this role would have been quite challenging for you.
Yes, it was. And the plan the second one that I worked on was the Development Plan 9. And we adopted a completely different way of doing it. Instead of it being just a government done product, I made sure we went out to the community, to all key representative organizations, private sector, the unions, civil society, and set up working groups to provide contribution. So the Fiji's ninth development plan, we also generated in 2 separate volumes. One is a national plan, and then we did a second volume on regional development. This was the first time that ever got done. So at an early age, I was able to do that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well done. Well, you mentioned about the 2 critical steps in your life that came early in your life. There's another third critical step which was waiting for you. Something of dramatic proportions was about to strike Fiji, and your career was going to be affected. In early 87, you were appointed, as I mentioned, the Permanent Secretary of Finance. Your move to the Finance Ministry was supposed to happen on Monday, the 18th of May, 1987. However, as is history now, Fiji's first military coup had taken place 4 days before your posting date. What happened immediately after the coup? I understand you reported to work.
Yes, on Friday, the 15th of May, I was in my office, and at about 10 o'clock, the minister's phone buzzed in my office, and I wondered who's in the minister's office, which is supposed to be vacant because the elected minister was in prison after the coup. So I walk in, and there's Mr. Peter Stinson sitting there occupying the minister's chair. And he had been my minister for roughly 2 years previously, and we were on first name terms. You'd call me John, and I'll call him Peter, when just 2 of us. But that day in the morning, 10 o'clock, I stood in front of his desk, looked at him, and he began to say, "Oh, John, at a time like this, people like us must come and help save our nation." I interrupted him, and I said to him, looking at him in his eye, and I said, Mr. Stinson, please don't tell me why you are occupying that chair. As far as I'm concerned, this is an act of treason. And I said, as a senior public servant, my loyalty would be to the Governor General. After a while, he carried on talking. Then I went back to my office. He went up to the 4th floor of the New Wing government buildings, Prime Minister's office, where Rambuka had his first meeting of his Council of Ministers. About 2 hours later, he came down. He called me again. Stinson called me again in his office. And he was actually quite nice to me. He said, John, I want you to know the Colonel wants you out of the way. So I was on Rambuka's hit list from day one. And Stinson said, I've as you can imagine, you are not going to go to the Ministry of Finance, but I've beseeched the Prime Minister, Rambuka, that we keep you here to look after this ministry, but you're not going to the Ministry of Finance. So that was an important day, because I was basically put on notice. My days were numbered.
So you're on the hit list, and I understand that sometime shortly after the coup, your very good friend, former governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, the late Savinatha Siwathimbao, made a profound statement to you. What was that statement, and what did you think at that time?
Yes, I should mention that Siwa, we call this Mr. Siwatima Siwa, and his wife Suliana, they both also did not support the coup. And Siwa and I used to meet once a week over lunch to compare notes, discuss what's going on. And it was in July that he said to me, he said, John, people like you and I should think of going away for a while. Think about it. Tell me how I can help you. And I knew exactly what he was telling me in the context of me being on the hit list of Rambuka. And so that's when I decided to apply to the Asian Development Bank. And I requested Siwa to be one of my referees. And I also requested him not to reveal this application to ADB to anybody in Fiji. I wanted it to be kept secret.
All right, so you applied for the ADB job. You get offered the position on Friday, 25th September 1987. But it was not all celebrations for you, was it? Something, again, dramatic happened on that day or the
Yes.
next day. What was it?
Well, I got a call from Philippines, from the ADB just before lunch, offering me a position. I negotiated the salary and all that on the phone. And I drafted a formal response to them accepting their offer. And at lunch, I went to have lunch with Ashif Razak, who's the owner of Golden Manufacturers. Ashif is a close friend. And I said to Ashif, Ashif, I want to take you into confidence. Please don't tell anybody about this, but I need you to send this for me from your office to ADB, accepting the position. He's a very busy guy. He goes, he forgets. And at 4 o'clock, he sends that fax to Manila. 4:30, the second coup takes place, and they shut off communication with the outside world. That happened on the Friday. Next morning, very early in the morning, 5:30, I was already up, because I usually on Saturdays go to the market. And my dog was barking furiously. So I come outside, and there were 6 soldiers with guns pointing at my dog, pet dog. And then they asked me, Mr. Samy, Secretary for Economic Development, etc. And I said yes. Then they put me in a car. They took me to prison, treated me like a common criminal. And
I understand that took you to the Central Police Station, and
Yes.
you were put in a cell there. Then you were transferred to Namboro, back to Central Police Station. How long were you locked up for?
4 days.
4 days.
And in the Central Police Station cell, there are a number of people. One of the most prominent was the Commissioner of Police himself, P.U. Raman.
Peter Raman, yes.
He was there in the cell with us. And there were several others, Claire Slater, a number of people. And the treatment, for example, is from a Itoke policeman. He'll come and P.U. Raman, was feeling very cold on the concrete, very filthy, because this is where these common criminals, they do all sorts of silly things like pissing and shitting and so on. And no bedding and so on. And he asked, "May I have a pillow?" And this police officer literally told him off in a very arrogant way. So this is the kind of things that were happening at that time.
And to think of it, that Mr. Raman was his absolute superior
Yes,
officer before the coup.
yes.
Let's move on. Now, just as you said, 4 days later you are released. What did you do then? I find this interesting because I've read that in your book.
I went home, had a shower, changed, went to my office, and one of my directors, Nelson Dalai Moloma, was already occupying my chair in my office.
Wow.
I then
So the
went.
writing, John, the writing was on the wall. You were told by Peter Stinson that
Yes,
you were on the hit list. Then when you get released, you go to your office, you see Nelson Dalai Loma sitting on your chair. What do you do?
I then went to the Public Service Commission to see the Secretary for Public Service Commission, Proceedings Bune. And when I saw him, there were two things he said which were actually very interesting. First thing, similar words to Peter Stinson. He said, "As you may know, the Colonel wants you out of the way." That was one statement he made. And then he immediately added, he said, "I understand that you've got a position with the Asian Development Bank." And he said, "If you are prepared to resign from the Fiji Public Service, I will see what I can do about your exit from the country." Now, this was at like 2:30 in the afternoon. By the time I got back home, 5:30, there was a hand-delivered letter from him waiting for me at my home, which read, "It is deemed that with effect from today's date, you have resigned from the Fiji Public Service. I wish you good luck."
So it is deemed. So there's no resignation letter from Mr. John Samy,
No.
but a resignation letter is accepted by Poseidon Bune.
Yes, yes.
All right, so that's a
And
product of the
how
coup
did he
culture.
know that I had a job with the Asian Development Bank? They would have been tapping my phone in the office.
Well, not going there, John. That's in the past. Now, you left Fiji in October 1987 for Manila in the Philippines to join the Asian Development Bank. You finished at the ADB in October 2006, moved to Auckland to settle down. Just 2 months after, on 6th December 2006, Vorengem Bainimarama carries out his coup and the Lasenian Garese government is removed. Let us now discuss the next chapter of your life, which is why I invited you on this platform. In February 2007, you make a visit to Fiji. While there, you meet Mr. Chaudhry, who at that stage was the Minister for Finance in the interim government. During the breakfast meeting with Mr. Chaudhry, he made a request. What was that request?
Yeah, he said, "John, can you step back and help us? We are putting together a roadmap going forward. Can you stay back and help us with that roadmap?" And I said, "No, I cannot stay back, but I'll send you my inputs when I get back to Auckland." But before I mention all that, let me, if I may, Sashi, very briefly mention that during the 20-year period with the ADB, every year on home leave, I used to go to Fiji. And I followed the situation of Fiji very, very closely. And during that 20-year period, the country literally had gone down like that, whichever way you looked at it. And so I had some very major concerns about the overall situation of Fiji as a country and its people. So when this Bainimarama coup took place, as I said to you, I don't support coups. I've taken a formal stance about that in 87. But in the wake of the Bainimarama coup, of course, Australia and New Zealand came out very vigorously opposed to this coup, yet another coup in Fiji. And I supported that. But I was getting really very, very concerned about the way forward for Fiji because they were putting very serious sanctions and so on also, Australia and New Zealand. So in January, towards the end of January, I wrote to the Secretary to Cabinet in Wellington, Diane Mocom. Diane and I had done our postgraduate studies in England. And I said to her, I said, Diane, as a fellow citizen of New Zealand, I fully support the stance taken by our government in condemning yet another coup in Fiji. But then I said, but Fiji desperately needs help in regard to the future. So she said, if you can come to Wellington, I'll arrange for you to meet with key people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I paid my way, went to Wellington, and had a 2-hour meeting with 3 senior people. And I could see from their body language, they were not interested in what I was saying. So
John, I'll stop you there, John.
I'm stopping there.
Yeah, I'll stop you there because I've read all those chapters. I want to get back to Fiji. So Mr. Chaudhary asks you to stay back so you can work on the road forward for Fiji. You say no, but I'll send you my input. You then prepared and sent Mr. Chaudhary a paper titled Fiji Roadmap for the Road Forward, FRMWF. Eventually, Mr. Chaudhary calls you back. What was the message that was relayed to you regarding your FRMWF paper?
Yeah, when he called me, he said he had received a letter from the Prime Minister, from Mr. Bainimarama, and he showed interest in what I had said in the paper. And he said, the Prime Minister wanted me to employ you. So I said, not so fast. I'm not seeking employment. I need to talk to the Prime Minister. So in March, I went back to Fiji.
So you then meet the interim Prime Minister, Bainimarama.
Yes.
Firstly, let me ask you, what was your first impression of Mr. Bainimarama?
Yeah, this was, I think it was a Tuesday, 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And for me, after 20 years, I was setting foot in that building for the first time. And in that meeting, present was Mr. Chaudhary, the finance minister then. Bainimarama he received me warmly. But the first thing I said to him, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, I'm now a citizen of New Zealand. I want you to know I fully support the stance taken by my government in condemning yet another coup in Fiji. Now, when I said that, he looked at me, stared at me, and before he'll tell me, get out of my office, I then quickly added, I said to him, I said, the Prime Minister, the only reason I'm sitting here in front of you this afternoon is that unlike the 1987 and the 2000 coups, which were race-based, get rid of the so-called Indians, you have come up with totally different reasons. You talk about a cleanup campaign, you talk about growing the economy, you talk about national unity, you talk about anti-corruption measures, stuff like that. All of these Fiji desperately needs to be done. Then I said to him, I said, but you don't have a mandate to do this. You don't have a mandate to do this. You go to the people of Fiji through a process that you are part of, but a process that you don't control and manipulate or dictate to, and get all the representative leaders from all the organizations, civil society, private sector, and so on, and form a national council and do a very detailed, in-depth analysis of what are the problems and needs of the country and chart the way forward. That was the nature of the discussion we had that afternoon in that first meeting. That meeting lasted 3.5 hours.
All right. Now, what did the interim Prime Minister say about your FRMWF paper?
Yeah. And then on the basis of this conversation that I had with him that evening, he then requested me, he said, can you put all of this together in a full paper? I want to take it to my cabinet. So I worked from that paper and I developed it into that proposal about going forward through a People's Charter. When that full paper I put together during the next 3-4 days, I hardly slept and I worked on it. And when I went to give it to him in the National Command Center, I spent about an hour going through that paper with him. And then he said to me, he said, we have the cabinet this afternoon. is it possible for you to come and do a presentation of this to the cabinet? So I said, yes, Prime Minister, I'm willing to do that. And then he said, then I said to him, I said, what about the military council? Knowing it's really the military council that was in control. And he said, oh, that's a good idea, but it cannot be this week. So then I had a meeting that morning at 10 o'clock with Mahen Chaudhary, and this was 9:45, so I had to take leave to go there. And as I was driving, the phone rang. I stopped the car, and the phone said, John, this is Frank here. And I was wondering, who is this Frank? Because I only met him twice. And he said, is it okay for us to meet with the military council today at 11:30? This is now just before 10 o'clock, and he's talking about meeting the full military council at 11:30. I said, yes, Prime Minister. So after the meeting with Mahen Chaudhary, just after 11, as I'm walking to the government building complex, the phone rings again, and he says, where are you? We are waiting for you. So that's what happened.
All right, John, look, let's move on. You're going into far too much details. What I'd like to do is cut through the chase and go to the important bits, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Now, as I said, you've met the Prime Minister. He's asked you to work on that paper. You produce a paper called Developing a Better Fiji for All through a People's Charter for Change and Progress. Then you are asked to produce that paper, present it to the cabinet. But then he calls you and says, I'd like you to present it to the cabinet and also to the military council. What was the experience like in standing before the military council and delivering a paper that in some sense would have been absolutely against what the coup had done? What was that experience like?
Yes. When I walked into the conference room of the Prime Minister just before 11:30, the Prime Minister was seated and the full military council in full military attire were there. And Sashi, I had goose pimples. My hair was all straight. And I had a very strange vibration going through my body at the time, being in the presence of these members of the military council. The first thing I said to them in that meeting, I said, I have a very strange sensation going through my body today. You may ask why. Let me tell you why. And I said to them, 20 years back, 6 of our men came and I was treated like a common criminal. And I had to leave the country of my birth. I worked for this international organization, traveled widely Asia and the Pacific. And what is the image of Fiji out there in the international community? It is that of a country with Coup culture. It is a banana republic. So I started by asking a question of them. I said, you, as the leaders of Fiji's military today, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Is it to continue to undermine and trample the fundamental rights of the people of this country, or to regain and redeem the image and reputation of this country in the global community? That's how I started the conversation with those questions, and then made a presentation.
Okay.
And I observed the body language of them. They were interested, they were paying attention, they were engaging.
So what was your core message to the military council?
No, the core message was that you cannot carry on with this coup culture reputation. There's so much that's needed. This country desperately needs to uplift itself. The poverty is at a high level. Suicide rate was among the highest in the world and stuff like that. And to go forward, you need a comprehensive plan and need to restore democracy and good governance, accountable good governance and stuff like that. I went through all of that and talked about setting up a national council and also to look at the role of the military. I discussed it also and set up a working group to look at what should be the role of how do we get rid of this coup culture and stuff like that.
We'll discuss in far more detail a bit later on in this program the role of the military and what the People's Charter had proposed for the Fiji military forces. Now, what was the end reaction in that military council meeting after you had presented your paper? What was the end reaction?
Yeah, after the discussion, as I mentioned, the members of the military council asked questions and made comments. But at the end, the Prime Minister, Mr. Bainimarama, thumped the table very hard and he said, "My military council is fully behind this. We are fully supportive of this way forward proposal," and so on. So that's how he concluded the meeting.
All right, let's move forward. But have a drink, John. Have a little break.
Yep.
You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, coming your way live on Facebook and on YouTube. My chief guest this afternoon is Mr. John Samy, and we're discussing the People's Charter with Mr. John Samy. John, on Independence Day, 10th October 2007, the People's Charter initiative gets formally launched. How much of a fanfare was this occasion?
I myself wasn't in Suva for that occasion, but I know that the president delivered a speech announcing this initiative. And he also announced that a 45-member National Council for Building a Better Fiji would be formed. And preparatory work would be underway immediately. And formally, the National Council would meet in January 2008. Those were the announcements that were made in the launching.
Okay. Then how did you go about gathering the support for the whole process countrywide?
That was a very, very critical undertaking. A lot of consultations were involved. There were a number of people who got actively involved. These are not government people, but from the civil society. I could mention a number of names if you wish me to, but this core group of people also helped. So we collected information on all the civil society major organizations, private sector major organizations, and so on, looked at who were the heads and so on. So the information was given to the office of the president for the announcement of a 45-member NCBBF. Now from government, only 10 were members. 31 came aboard from the civil society, private sector, etc. Political parties, the major political parties, Laiseni Angara says SDL did not come forward. National Federation Party did not come forward. And Mick Beddoes, United People's Party, I think, did
United
not come
Front.
forward. Yeah,
Okay.
United Front. Yep. But the total number that did come forward, including 10 from government, 31 from non-government, they came forward. And the first meeting was held on the 16th of January 2008.
But my question was, how did you gather support countrywide? How did you get people behind the initiative?
Yeah. What we did was in that, if I may, in that meeting in January, the National Council set up what it called national task teams, 3 national task teams from within its own membership. And in each of those 3 task teams, they set up 3 working groups. So altogether 9 working groups. And close to 200 people from outside of government were mobilized to take part in those working groups. And a total of 51 issues and discussion papers were generated, which were drawn upon to formulate a very comprehensive state of the nation and economy report. Now, one of the things we did was by February, we did what was called a consultation document, if I can hold it, a consultation document for the preparation of the State of the Nation and Economy report. This was February. By early August, a 400-page SNE report was done with very detailed recommendations on the way forward. And what we did was we did an executive summary also of that SNE report, which was circulated in English and the vernacular languages widely throughout the country. to generate a conversation and invite contributions and so on. So that process was held, and the National Council members and other people volunteered across the whole country to get inputs from people.
Now, tell me whether my next suggestion to you holds any weight or not. Is it true that members of the Fiji military forces, the soldiers, went through a number of different communities into rural communities and stood by and asked people to sign the document? Is there any truth to that allegation?
That allegation was made repeatedly, but to the best of my knowledge, that is not true.
Okay, let us now discuss the actual People's Charter, John. I understand that that they recommended 11 key pillars for rebuilding Fiji. I would like to invite you at this juncture, if you could just tell us what the 11 pillars were first, before I pick a few pillars to discuss with you.
You want me to just mention what the pillars were about?
No, I just want you to. No, I don't want you to discuss what's it about.
No.
Look,
The name of each pillar, you mean?
that's right. That's what I've asked you to do.
Okay.
I've got it here, but I want to give you the honor of doing it since you
Okay.
put in the hard words. So,
Yeah.
what was pillar one?
The first pillar was about ensuring sustainable democracy and good and just governance. That was the first pillar. The
Second one, I'll
second
help
one,
you if it's, go on.
let me
Second one was developing a common national identity and building social cohesion. I've got it here, John. I'll read it out.
please do so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, second one was developing a common national identity and building social cohesion. Pillar three, ensuring effective, enlightened, and accountable leadership. Four, enhancing public sector efficiency, performance effectiveness, and service delivery. Five, achieving higher economic growth while ensuring sustainability. Six, making more land available for productive and social purposes. Seven, developing an integrated development structure at the divisional level. 8, reducing poverty to a negligible level by 2015. 9, making Fiji a knowledge-based society. 10, improving health service delivery. 11, enhancing a global integration and international relations. So those were the 11 pillars. Now, surely, on paper, the 11 pillars seem to address every crucial aspect of building a better Fiji, John. Let us at this juncture discuss a few of these pillars. Let's start with pillar one. Pillar one, as we mentioned, was on ensuring sustainable democracy and good and just governance. John, if I may ask you, what were the critical problems and issues identified under this section of pillar one?
Yeah. Under the critical problems and issues, the most important points made was that a fair and just constitution is the basis of good governance. But Fiji's experience was that our constitutions had been divisive, separating the people, being very strongly ethnic based, stratification, and Fiji's electoral system, racially discriminatory and undemocratic, while in violation of the United Nations Conventions on Discrimination. And another key point being made was that for there to be effective democratic governance, people must be placed at the center. In terms of the focus of governance. Those were some of the major, I could go on, but those were the major ones. And another key point was that it said very clearly, we must put an end to the cycle of coups.
All right. So those were the critical problems and issues identified under pillar one. Let me talk to you about good governance. To ensure good and just governance, including transparency and accountability, under those pillars, what was the recommendation? What must the government do to achieve that?
Yeah, there's a long list of them, but I'll just mention a few just to highlight. One
Yes,
was the
sure.
reform of the electoral system, and quite a lot of detailed work was done on that, and recommendations provided. We, in fact, on electoral reforms, we had done a pamphlet, which was again circulated widely in the country in all three languages about what were the imperatives in regard to electoral reform. And the other, to ensure good and just governance, including transparency and accountability, and to combat corruption. There were a whole raft of measures that were proposed in the SNE report. And I'll give you a few examples. An independent and well-resourced ombudsman's office with broadened powers of investigation, an independent and well-resourced Fiji Human Rights Commission, an independent and well-resourced Auditor General's Office, an independent and well-resourced Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption. These are some examples of some of the things. And also in regard to the ending the cycle of coups, there were 14-pronged principles-based strategy was also included in the SNE report.
So how was the cycle of coups going to end? Of those 14, give us 5 or 6 most important recommendations that would see the cycle of coups end in Fiji. How was
Yeah.
this going to be achieved?
Yeah, I will, because 14 is a long list. I'll just mention one or two. Okay.
Go on.
Yep. One was to redefine and clarify the role of the Royal Fiji Military Force to ensure it is committed to defending the Constitution. That was one of them. And the courts be empowered to penalize, including orders of dissolution of political parties that engage in activities that breach important values of the Constitution. And so on. One of the things we had done, we had set up a working group on the role of Fiji's security forces in national development. And so the idea there was that you are putting so much money into the military. They're not always out there fighting wars in Fiji, certainly not. Of course, they were going to the Middle East and whatever. But in Fiji, the point being made was that they could play a role in development by going out, helping the poor, in construction of this and that or whatever. But there were things like that included. The report of the working group was submitted to the military council. And they discussed it fully. They agreed with it. They made no changes to what were being recommended.
All right. Now, as you would know, the suggestions have not changed since then. But you mentioned the military council. Maybe at this juncture, who were some of the members of the military council? Do you remember? Would you like to share that?
Oh, I cannot remember by name. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Now, sticking to Pillar 1, Pillar 1 also recommended that the role of the RFMF had to be realigned. What did this mean?
Realign, that's the point I made earlier briefly, to enhance their community development partnership by strengthening their developmental role, to ensure that they, are not just sitting there in the barracks, but out there helping the community in basic infrastructure, rehabilitation and development, and doing other things to help the communities and so on.
Okay. All right. Given that good and just governance includes transparency and accountability, let me ask you whether the current Fiji First government embraces good governance, John. If yes, why? And if no, why not?
The Prime Minister, right up front when I first met him, and subsequently when I got to know him as interim Prime Minister, I knew he was sincerely and deeply committed to moving forward on all this front. But for reasons that I've not been able to fathom fully, even though I've made exerted efforts in 2010, 2011 to find out about why they dropped the ball. I think they've gone back to square one, basically.
Okay. All right. Let's move now to Pillar 3. I will come back about the role of the military later on in this interview, and I'll also address some electoral issues with you as well. But let's move to what was described under Pillar 3. And Pillar 3 was to ensure effective, enlightened, and accountable leadership. What were the critical problems and issues that were highlighted under Pillar 3 in terms of leadership, John?
Yeah. Under the critical problems and issues, there were, in summary, 5 key points made. One was, our people have suffered the type of leadership that has been elitist, parochial, divisive, extremist, and self-centered. This has done little to advance the interests of our ordinary people. Second key point, we need leaders who are committed to genuine consultation, inclusiveness, and accountability. 3, our leaders in most cases have failed to involve us in making the major decisions that affect our well-being in our daily lives. We need leaders who are positive, visionary, transformative, and constructive. And finally, we need leaders with a progressive vision for Fiji, a vision that is uplifting, motivating, unifying, and inspiring.
All right. I mean, on paper, those are
Yep.
great ideals to have in leadership. But what were some of the urgent recommendations then in terms of leadership issues?
Yeah, in regard to way forward, one was to have a code of conduct for public servants, public and independent constitutional office holders, municipal councils, and members of parliament, and persons who hold statutory appointments or governing or executing positions in statutory authorities. There was quite a bit of emphasis on the importance of leadership, and it said develop a leadership model and vision which clarifies the legitimate roles of elected and non-elected leaders in democratic Fiji. Another was to support and ensure the participation of women leaders at all levels of decision making, and increase public awareness, including civic education at school level, on key leadership principles. So
All right.
Yeah.
When you look at today's Fiji, what would you say about the sort and style of leadership existing today? Do you think it is effective, enlightened, and accountable leadership? Does Fiji have such a leadership?
Emphatically no.
Okay.
We have not
Why?
made progress on that front, and I think Fiji, despite being a small country, we, in terms of political governance, we inherited the Westminster model, which is very adversarial, and that adversarialism prevails in Fiji's political governance. And the national interest, the needs of the ordinary, desperately poor people, and so on, they get relegated. And somebody mentioned that we should be looking at the qualifications of people who stand up to become leaders of communities. There's merit in that. There needs to be some discussion about those sort of matters.
What should be the changes that should come about in the leadership today? What would you like to see in the leadership today?
I actually was going to use the word put Fiji first, but that can get misinterpreted. But Fiji as a nation and its people should be way up in terms of focus in regard to the needs and what needs to be done to meet those needs. And instead of just pronouncements, we need to achieve results in getting things done. We need that kind of effective leaders who are able to get things done, not just make promises and engage in adversarialism.
Let's move on to Pillar 5, which was about achieving higher economic growth while ensuring sustainability. What was highlighted as the critical problems and issues under Pillar 5?
Yeah. One very general point made was that Fiji's economy had been performing far below its potential, and that there was need to build confidence and also raise investment levels to achieve higher rates of sustainable growth in the economy. And the government, it was pointed out, the government plays an over-dominant role in the economy, with politicians and officials second-guessing the business decisions of private sector entrepreneurs. And three, infrastructure. Fiji's infrastructure seriously deteriorated over the years. And a number of times, after 2009, when I would go and see courtesy call on Mr. Bainimarama, this was a point I would raise with him, because when you drive around, for example, Viti Levu, and look at the standard of the roads, the deterioration, tragic. And then when you look at people who are supposed to be out there improving, maintaining, large numbers of people, most of the time sitting around basically doing very little work. So serious issues about effective implementation, getting things done.
All right. Well, surely the way forward in achieving higher economic growth while ensuring sustainability, any government would have to ensure that it provides an enabling environment and plays its part in facilitating and supporting private sector-led growth. Now, what way forward did the Charter propose?
Yeah. Well, you used those words already, enabling environment. The idea being that in terms of the role of government, it needed to set up the environment, create the conditions to seriously play a positive catalytic role to catalyze private sector-led growth. Very important. The other was, the need for enhancing cooperation and partnerships between government, the private sector, and the civil society. No, very important, maintaining macroeconomic stability through sound, consistent, and progressive policies, and ensuring the principles of fiscal responsibility through the Financial Management Act. Implementation again, I will emphasize. And a lot more needs to be done to develop micro, small, medium enterprises, because they do create jobs, and they contribute significantly, but not much was being done. And also export orientation, diversification. For too long, Fiji was dependent on sugar. Sugar has been on a downhill slope. Tourism came up, but Fiji's got is a resource-rich country. It's got so much land that remains unutilized, and a lot more could be done to produce cash crops. I'll give you one example, if I may. There's a lot of Asia Pacific people in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, and they like to eat the okra, the eggplant, baigan, the karela, stuff like that. But it's so expensive here; it's very difficult to get that. And Fiji can grow these things abundantly and get into these niche markets, and get these small-scale farmers producing these things to get more income. And I'll mention one thing about okra, if I may. Among the Asia Pacific people, diabetes is a major problem. And it has been scientifically proven that fresh okra, fresh bindi, is a natural cure for diabetes. So we could in Fiji produce a lot more okra for exports, and also market it from that angle that this is a cure for diabetes also. That's just an example.
All right. Well, that was the way forward proposed in the Charter. How do you see the situation in Fiji today? Is Fiji doing well in its economic growth?
No, it is not. And okay, this post-COVID period is a special pandemic period with the sugars, with the tourism industry completely closed down. That has severely affected the overall economic situation of the country. That is taken as a given. But I go back 2012 onwards. The government, for example, seems to have dropped the ball. A lot more could have been done, has not been done. So we are, what we were looking at the time when the charter was being formulated and the State of the Nation and Economy report was done with very detailed recommendations going forward. If the 30% of that got implemented, Fiji would be in a different situation. So it has lacked effective implementation. And then the ruling party seems to have dropped the ball. They don't even talk about the People's Charter anymore.
Right. The Fiji First government has now gone on record, it's still staying with the economy. The government has gone on record and projected growth rates of 11.3%. I'm sure you've heard of that. Do you think this is really possible, given that there's a global recession happening? For example, interest rates in Australia, they've gone up. And I've just heard on the news yesterday that the interest rate here will probably go up again on Tuesday. So, what do you think of Fiji's projected 11.3% growth rate?
Yeah, I would like to look into that in detail to see what is the basis on which that projection is made. But one way of looking at it, and I'm not being skeptical here, is when you hit the rock bottom, and even if you move marginally up, in growth terms, the figure can look high, but in need terms, a lot more needs to be done. So Fiji did hit the rock bottom, and that's why those numbers look high. But from the very rock bottom. If Fiji were to get back to what it was pre-COVID, then that figure I would say, is unachievable.
So, if I may suggest, or I could ask a question here, is the projected growth rate, do you think it's an election gimmick? What are your thoughts?
Could be. Yeah, could be.
All right. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Mr. John Samy, former sole member and chairman of the Prices and Incomes Board in Fiji. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page. I'd just like to make a comment to one viewer, Ebony D. Please refrain from making personal attacks or casting aspersions on my guests. If you don't like it, please leave the platform. And I really don't care about the numbers. I have to respect my guests and talk to them. So let's give respect to my guests. And if you don't refrain, we will remove you from this platform, Ebony D. So please respect that. John, let us now shift to Pillar 8. This was about reducing poverty to a negligible level by 2015. Well, before we speak about poverty in Fiji in 2022, in the Charter, what was seen as the critical issues and problems?
Yeah, well, the critical problem was the number of people, been facing a very bleak future. At that time, 4 out of every 10 persons lived under conditions of poverty. and a large proportion of the poor, while in full-time employment, constituted the working poor, and 55% of the wage earners and incomes that were below the poverty line. People need a living wage. That is a long way away, it seems. And income inequalities remain very deep. The poorest 20% of Fiji's people received only 6% of the national income, while the richest 20% received close to 50%. And the people who lived in squatter settlements, being among the very poor, lived in unsafe, underserved, and overcrowded houses, and prone to illegal actions and stuff like that.
So, what was the way forward as recommended by the Charter to reduce poverty in Fiji? Remembering that this was around about 2007, 2008 period.
2008, yes. Well,
Yes.
one of the things was to launch a concerted and coordinated national program to reduce poverty, with the target to reduce poverty in line with the Millennium Development Goal number 1. So the idea being to go beyond the level of halving the incidence by 2015. That was one of the key recommendations. And the other was to strengthen coordination, implementation, and monitoring of poverty alleviation programs, including partnership agreements between government, the civil society, and the private sector. Introducing a national minimum wage and also enhancing national productivity. Protecting, encouraging savings and investments of the poor. And affirmative action programs to a shared social justice preamble. Those were some of the things that were included. There are a lot more details in the SNE report.
All right. Now, I picked up on one, and that was the introduction of a national minimum wage. That was mooted. Why do you think it has taken this government such a long time to increase the national minimum wage? That went up in the last budget.
Yes.
And your recommendation was from 2008.
Yes.
And 14 long years after that.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's taken them so long?
I'm at a loss to know why, quite frankly. I'm at a loss to know why. And yet this yet again keeps bringing up to my head the two things. One, leadership. We need effective, accountable leadership. And we certainly appear to have been lacking it because we don't see those things happening. And the other point I've stressed several times, if I may yet again, it's can be easy to have policies and plans, but what we need is effective results-based implementation.
Okay. John, if you look at the reality in Fiji today, it has been documented that poverty is around at 50%, regardless of how much sugar coating the government does, regardless of the figures being downgraded by the World Bank. The fact remains that poverty in Fiji is really alive and it's a real issue. What do you think went wrong?
We have I think people have tended to look up to and rely too much on government.
So, do you think the government has lost the plot then?
Government has lost the plot, but that's where I'd like people to actually have a good hard look at that People's Charter document, because that was about empowering the people to get a lot more proactively involved in regard to issues relating to development that affect them, and also actively working to uplift their situations. And I mentioned about land. There's so much land that can be better utilized, productively utilized. Not happening.
We've known that from the time we were little whippersnippers.
Yes,
We've known that from Yongs. That's
Yes.
not happening. But let's not move away. I want you to stick to this thing. You've agreed and you've said that the government has lost the plot. Now, if the government has lost the plot in managing poverty levels, in managing the interest of its people, you can't really expect the people to go back. I mean, yes, you can expect them to go back and read about the People's Charter, but those things are no longer in the consideration of this of this current government. So my next question to you then is: if government has lost the plot, what do the people of Fiji do as they determine their choices at the next ballot?
It's a very important question. I don't want to be misinterpreted in what I'm going to say now.
Mm.
But when you have any one person, say, as the prime minister of our country for too long, and I'm not just talking about Fiji, I'm making a general point. That can become counterproductive, and so there is need for change. But change to what? What are the options? What are the options people have in this area? But this is in regard to political governance. But that brings me yet again to the point where this proactive involvement and leadership should also be exercised at the local level, at the level of the communities, to produce more and to raise income levels, etc., instead of just depending on political leadership.
All right, now I move our discussions to Pillar 10, which was about improving health service delivery. Let me say at this juncture that a healthy nation is a wealthy nation, and every life matters, as you know. If you are healthy, you can wish anything. If you are not healthy, you wish only to have your health back. That's why health is the foundation of a community, of a society. John, as we look back at Pillar 10, improving health service delivery, what was seen then as the critical problems and issues?
There were two indicated in the charter document itself, and the details are in the SNE report. One was Fiji's overall progress towards the three health-related Millennium Development Goals, i.e., reduction in child mortality, maternal mortality, and HIV/AIDS has been disappointing. This is at that time, 2008. Resources allocated for health service delivery as a proportion of GDP remains low by international standards, including compared to countries such as even the Solomon Islands and Tonga. This was highlighted.
Okay. And what was the suggested way forward then?
To increase financing as a proportion of GDP by 0.5% annually to reach at least 7% within a 10-year period. And strengthen institutional arrangements by centralizing decision-making and decentralizing the delivery of healthcare. Expanding private sector role in public healthcare delivery, such as through outsourcing, and strengthening public and private sector coordination, including with the medical professional organizations, to meet the manpower needs. Another was to consider other options for health financing, such as social health insurance, in addition to tax financing, and to establish a health policy commission. In my recent visits, I've come to realize how in the major hospitals, the quality and standard of service has actually deteriorated quite seriously. So
Yes, we've spoken about that on this program. We've had former health ministers here as well. We've discussed to our other politicians about the health service on a number of times. Interestingly, you mentioned that a health policy commission was suggested. Now, what good would this have done for Fiji?
well, if you have a broadly representative body like that, rather than just relying on the Ministry of Health, they would look at what's going on, provide constructive inputs to enable changes to be made, both to policy and to what gets done at the level of health delivery.
John, let's turn the clock turn the clock forward 14 years from the People's Charter of 2008. What are your views of the health service delivery in Fiji now, and where do you think it went wrong? It's gone wrong.
Well, as I mentioned, they have not been adequately resourcing the health sector, and the I went to Lotoka Hospital to have a look because relatives were admitted there, and I could not believe what I saw. The standard of service was terrible, and so there's a great need to uplift it, to have more people trained, qualified as nurses, doctors, and so on. That's important.
All right, so now let me ask you this. We've discussed the pillars. I chose a few pillars. Don't have time to discuss all 11 of those pillars. So everything seemed to be going well until the interim prime minister sent you an email on 23rd June 2011, in which he said, and I'll read this email with your permission, may I?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. And I quote, this is the email that interim prime minister Bainimarama sent on 23rd June 2011. And the email read, and I quote, John, I've changed my mind on this and need a lot more time than we discussed. Stop all the actions that we talked about that should take place, please, and I will let you know when further actions should take place and the appropriate timings. Vinaka and a good trip back to New Zealand. By copy of this email, I'm letting the AG know. My question, what happened? Why the sudden call by Bainimarama to stop all the action?
I had actually in June gone and seen the prime minister, and because that was 2011, because during my visits to Fiji and also here in New Zealand and other places, talking to people, the general feedback coming through was of great concern, very negative. And so I wanted to have a one-on-one conversation with him, and he kindly agreed to let me see him. And I met him at 10 o'clock on a Monday, and I prepared eight to 9 page submission to him, which was quite direct, saying to him what I've just briefly mentioned to you earlier. And I also put forward a number of critical way forward recommendations. And during that meeting, at first he said he had only 1 hour to give me at 10 o'clock because he had another appointment at 11. But once we got going and he was going through also what I had written and put to him, he put his hands like this on his head and he said, "Oh, this is what I've been waiting for."
But John, you've gone back right to the beginning. We've discussed part
No,
of it.
No. This I'm talking about 2011, the June 2011 that you
No,
mentioned.
but I want you to stick to that letter. Is that what you're talking about? That meeting?
That's the one I'm
Okay.
talking about. Why
All right,
he?
please.
So during that conversation, he cancelled his 11 o'clock meeting, and I was there going through with him till about 12:30. And he basically agreed about these way forward recommendations, and even agreed to write a formal letter which he signed. And he called his attorney general twice on the phone, and he said, "I've got John Samy here. I want him to come and brief you about our conversation, and then the three of us should meet today in the evening, Monday." I went and saw the attorney general. The meeting was somewhat brief, but the three of us could not meet that evening. Now, the long and short of it is that early morning next day, the prime minister went to Lambasa for meetings, and it was and I had got his clearance to talk to a core group of civil society leaders about the meeting that I'd had with him about the way forward, uh, immediate way forward measures and actions. And then it was from Lambasa, he sent me what you read out, saying what we've discussed, I need more time, and so on. And so my response, you can read out also when I replied
No,
to him.
yeah, I'm coming to that. But effectively, the Prime Minister had put a stop to the People's Charter moving forward. So my question was, what happened? And now my follow up question is, what was the precursor? You said you met the Attorney General. What do you think was the precursor? Why suddenly the Prime Minister, who was so supportive, so happy with what was being done, why the change of mind all of a sudden? What do you think happened?
No, at that time in 2011, he had not stopped on the People's Charter. But the feedback coming from all corners about the government and about his leadership role, what he was doing or not doing, raised a whole raft of issues and concerns. That was the purpose of that meeting that I had with him
No,
in
but
June.
the email, pardon me, I beg your pardon, but that email specifically says, John, I've changed my mind on this and need a lot more time than we discussed. Stop all the actions that
Yes,
we talked about.
yes.
So effectively, he'd put a stop to it, be it for an interim measure. So my question is, what do you think happened? You you said that the Attorney General came into the picture. You also had a meeting with the Attorney General, didn't you? In the
Upon
absence of the
the
Prime Minister.
upon the Prime Minister's request.
Yes.
Yeah,
So then the Prime Minister flies to Mombasa,
yeah.
sends you an email, and virtually it's all over. So I'm asking you, and if it's too
Yeah,
difficult to answer,
somebody put a spanner in the works.
and
I
do
know,
you know who that was?
I know, but I don't want to mention the name.
All
Uh,
right.
and, and
Well,
and and let me also mention to you, in that meeting on the Monday in June with the Prime Minister, one of the things I did say to him was that the word around is that there's one of your ministers who's controlling you, and you are feeding from that person's arm. You become too dependent on that one person who's acting like a minister for everything. And if you don't deal with this problem, he's going to cause your downfall. I said that to the Prime Minister.
and what was his response?
No, and when he picked up the phone and talked to the Attorney General, he wanted me to go and inform the Attorney General about the meeting I had with the Prime Minister, and I was going to do that. But the first meeting that Monday afternoon with the Attorney General did not last for too long. But after the Prime Minister had gone to Lambasa in the morning, I went and saw the Attorney General for over an hour. And when I began to talk to him about the details of what I had discussed with the Prime Minister, he said, "No need, the Prime Minister will reply to you." And that's when
All
I got.
right. Well, look, we all know, everybody refers to Mr. Kayyum as the minister in charge of everything. People have accused Mr. Kayyum of being the one man leader. People have accused both him and the prime minister as being a two-man show. What I'm effectively trying to ask you today to clear the air and is that, do you think that together the Attorney General convinced the Prime Minister that it perhaps was not the right way to move ahead for Fiji, whatever it was? Because by way of deduction, you
Mm.
meet the PM, who's excited, you then meet the AG, and then at that meeting he says, don't worry about it, I'll talk
Yeah.
to the PM later. You then get that email from Lambasa, which more or less says stop.
Yes.
We'll
Yes.
move on. What's your answer?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying, and if you read the contents of what I had put to the Prime Minister in that Monday June meeting about the way forward, all the details are there in that letter,
Do,
to which he had agreed, and then he sent that one about I need more time and so on and so forth, and then during that thing, if I may share this, Sashi, out of the blue, one of the things that the Prime Minister did say to me, he said, there are two people in whose presence I feel deeply awed. AWED, deeply
Yes,
awed.
awed. And
He,
who
he
are those two
mentioned,
people?
yeah, he mentioned Ratu Iloilo, the president who's passed away, and he mentioned the Archbishop Petro Matada, that
Hmm.
the two people. So in November, when I was in Fiji, I went and saw the Archbishop. And when I
All right.
began
I can understand that, but I need to stick to this. But go on. What did you want to say?
no. What I covered in the June meeting with Mr. Bainimarama, when I started talking about that to the Archbishop, he began to add on to it because he said to me, he said, John, wherever I go, I'm getting very similar feedback, very negative feedback. So then I said to him, I said, Your Grace, shall we both, you and I, write to the Prime Minister?
That I'm coming to because you did right, and
Yeah,
I'm going to come to that.
yeah.
You're jumping the gun. Let me control my interview, please, with all due respect to you.
Okay, okay.
Now, so effectively, the People's Charter is dead. Now, your involvement in the People's Charter exercise came at a great cost to you. I understand that during that process, you were called many names, such as a stateless migrant, nomad opportunist, a little runt, a mongrel, a racist, as one who should be removed from Fiji and made a persona non grata. Nasty, nasty things were written about you. What impact did this have on you, John?
Of course, was aware of all that while I was there heading the secretariat, working on the People's Charter. Uh, Quite frankly, I did not allow that to undermine my willpower and to get on and do what I thought was necessary to do. I did that. I did not let that pull me down in any way. That I assure you. But this book that I wrote, I wanted for posterity to record also that and put that into context, because there were also a number of people who were questioning the salary I was being paid, and describing it as totally unfair, unjust, shameful, and disgusting. Stuff like that. Now, the salary I was being paid, if I may mention that, I don't mind mentioning that,
Go on.
was Fiji dollars 12,000 a month, on which I paid tax. When I left the Asian Development Bank 5 years prior to reaching retirement age, I was there on a tax-free salary per month, Fiji dollars of about 70,000, not 12,000, but about 70,000. When I left that job, I could have stayed there for another 5 years. I resolved not to look for work because I didn't want to go looking for work. So I
All
did
right.
not go to Fiji to look for work for a salary. And in fact, I had suggested to the Archbishop in 2007, to the end of 2007, that they appoint somebody locally based to head the secretariat, and I would assist that person. They said, no,
John,
John, you started this. We want you to
John,
be. Mm.
John, I'll stop you there because I don't care about the salary because I'm one of those believers that if you get somebody to do work, they have to be paid their fair dues. Now you're drifting off center. Can you please move yourself towards the center? It seems to me that you're going off camera.
No,
No, yeah, you're center now. Thank you.
okay.
Let's talk to each other. Now the charter is finished. It's seen the light of day. What do you think could have been achieved had the charter, seen its way through?
A lot. I keep referring to the State of the Nation and Economy report, 400-page report. There are about 30 pages of detailed recommendations about what needed to be done in the immediate term, short term, medium term, and the long term. At that time, very detailed recommendations with key performance indicators also included. Now, if those were to have been implemented effectively, results based, Fiji would be a very different Fiji today. The relevance of all of that is not dead. You've mentioned this, used this word several times about the charter being dead. Charter needs to be brought back to life because it was basically about the empowerment of the people of Fiji. They need to get much, much more proactively involved, wake up to it, if I may say so. You know, some of the things in the charter did get implemented 2009, 2010, but then by the time the election took place, they dropped the ball, the Fiji First government.
Okay. Now, we have looked at the People's Charter as you and your supporters espoused it. There, however, remain some questions on the whole exercise. Now, let me state quite categorically the Charter, which was born out of the trashing of the 1997 Constitution, required the people of Fiji to agree to pledge that we, the people of Fiji, commit to support the Constitution and the People's Charter as the foundation for rebuilding our nation. Therefore, the call was to support a new constitution after the 1997 Constitution was abrogated. Now, the 1997 Constitution had been unanimously passed by the Great Council of Chiefs and Parliament with the support of all the political representatives of the people and with the full consultation throughout the country by the Reeves Commission. My question, therefore, is, was the whole charter exercise partially to legitimize the 2006 carried out by Bainimarama? Was there a part of you that somehow justified the coup? That's the question.
I will have to say I emphatically disagree with that assertion on your part, that I played any role in justifying or legitimizing the 2000 coup. I took a stance. I told Bainimarama in his face that I did not support the coup. And I even said that in an economic summit to a large audience, that's what I had said to the Prime Minister when I first met him. The charter, if you read it carefully, does not talk about abrogating that constitution. It talks about reforming and strengthening it through a number of measures, and one of which is in the area of electoral reforms. I mentioned to you, undemocratic, race-based, and stuff like that. So the charter did not talk about abrogating the constitution. If the government went ahead and did that, it's not because the charter advocated it. No.
Okay. I guess the real question is whether there was a legitimate attempt to support the rule of law all the time, or was there an attempt, even from government sources, to try and legitimize and support a violent, treasonous military overthrow of a legally elected government? I mean, the overwhelming support that you got initially for the charter, was that a reason that it was endorsed so widely by powers in government, including the Prime Minister?
Sashi, for my part, after the 2006 coup, when I first met with the Prime Minister, you know, I could not wishfully think that if I say to him, go back to the barracks, he'll get up and go back to the barracks. And I did say to him that his cleanup campaign, growing the economy, national unity, all of those things, Fiji desperately needed. But go to the people through a process that you are part of, but one that you don't control and manipulate, to which he agreed. And I affirm in my book that to his credit, he abided by that, because I was very particular about that. Also about the coup culture and so on, I addressed that to the military council very directly and had a working group. And the report that came out, it was not just the military council people. There were only 2 representatives that participated in the working group. Majority were civil society people. That report was put to the full military council, fully discussed, and they agreed. And so at the end of the day, At the moment, I heard you very loudly and clearly. Currently, with an election coming up, there is speculation that, well, if Bainimarama loses, there may be yet another coup. I understand that there is some discussion like that afoot. But I'm not the one who's creating that discussion or party to any of that, because I don't believe in coups.
All right. Now, during that charter process, was there any suggestion, any talk of having that 1997 constitution brought back? Or was it just out of the question?
That the discussion was about further developing that constitution, but working within that. There was no discussion about abrogating that constitution.
All right. Now, what about electoral reforms? What was the proposal in the charter for that?
Very detailed proposals. As I think I mentioned that those things earlier. The electoral system that Fiji has had, race-based, discriminatory, and stuff like that, violating the United Nations conventions on discrimination, and the right to universal and equal suffrage. And the reforms that were suggested by the working group and adopted in the charter were to go to an open list voting system and not to have a race-based discriminatory system.
So the electoral system that is in place right now,
Yeah.
how do you view that? Given
Oh, they did not go into and embrace those key recommendations that were there, but that is, I guess, subject for another discussion. But I'll mention one of the key, the very first of the electoral reform measures, the complete abolishment of the communal representation system as provided for under the 1997 Constitution and the Electoral Act 1998, and the use of a common roll for all future elections. That was another key recommendation. So there was no suggestion there of abolishing or abrogating the 1997 Constitution, but reforming and bringing about a number of changes. There are about 9 measures that were mentioned through the work that was done in the Charter framework.
All right. There were a lot of pro-democracy supporters that just did not subscribe to your views on the People's Charter. However, it seems that you somewhat redeemed yourselves, because in a letter dated 17th November 2011, and you just alluded to that letter a little while ago, that letter of 17th November 2011, addressed to the Prime Minister Voreqe Bainimarama, in the written submissions it was written, and I quote, "A number of actions taken by your interim government have signaled that it has drifted away from the spirit and key principles of the People's Charter, and that it has betrayed the people of Fiji on its most solemn promises." The submissions further stated, and I quote, "The current government in Fiji is highly controlled, and it has instilled a growing sense of fear amongst the populace. This is becoming increasingly and more widely perceived as being repressive." As we discussed, the Charter was stopped in June 2011, and here in November 2011, you are writing to the Prime Minister. What was the reason behind this letter? What were you trying to achieve?
Same as what was the reasons for what I said to him in June, and then on the basis of advice, he backtracked. And that's why I had gone and seen the Archbishop, and the two of us agreed to say pretty much all of that yet again, but through signature rather than me alone. So that got done twice within the year. And I had requested His Grace the Archbishop not to send that letter, but to personally hand deliver it to the Prime Minister, which I believe he did. And there were developments thereafter, but still, looking back, a lot more needs to be done.
All right, well, I'll quote some more from that letter. You wrote, and I quote, serious issues of transparency, accountability, and overall governance have been emerging, such as a few cabinet ministers holding multiple portfolios, especially you and the Attorney General, resulting in whispers around that both of you are being paid exorbitant salaries, the payment of the salaries of all cabinet ministers being administered outside of the government through a high fees based contractual agreement involving a close relative of the AG rather than, as would be normal, by the Ministry of Finance and the militarization of key institutions of the state. The failure on your part to address these has fueled the growing perception that you, your ministers, and the military council are now enjoying power and the benefits associated with it so much that you will not relinquish it voluntarily, that power has corrupted you all. End of quote. Now, John, by any stretch of the imagination, this was a damning indictment on Bainimarama and his ministers and cabinet. What prompted you and Archbishop Mathatha to state these things in this manner?
Because we shared those concerns. I had said all of that to Mr. Bainimarama in my June meeting. And then when he backtracked and said, I need more time, etc., and I went and saw the Archbishop, we both had shared these concerns. So we decided let's submit this jointly. That's what happened. So this got done twice, as I mentioned. I did that same thing with the same message in June, and then the two of us did that in November.
Were you trying to call a spade after it was all over?
After it was all over, because I don't live in Fiji, I live abroad. I'm not there on a daily basis. I'm not in government, directly responsible or accountable for getting any of those things done. But being Fiji born, Fiji bred, Fiji is my motherland. I care about the country situation and the people, the way forward. So I felt I needed to do what was necessary, so I tried to do that.
But
And
were you calling a spade a spade? I mean, you
yes,
more or less said that, you're all corrupt.
you read the contents of that. That's the conclusion. So be it. Yeah.
Okay, so did you get a response from the Prime Minister?
No, not in writing, but there were subsequent developments, 2012 onwards. Some positive, but I mentioned to you about the constitution. They did not go back to draw upon what came through the charter process. They should have.
John, let me stop you. I'm referring to the letter of November. You wrote that damning indictment letter,
Yeah,
and my
no,
question
no,
was,
nothing in
did you get a
writing.
response?
No, nothing in writing. No,
So did he phone you and abuse the hell out of you or something, or how did he
no.
respond?
He did not respond to me. He did not
That's
get
it.
in
So
touch
that's
with
the
me.
question. Okay. All right. Well, do you think that today power has corrupted them all? That's what you wrote, as you wrote. Do you think that's the truth today?
I've not seen any change. So, what was written there then, and if you look at the overall situation of the country today, I don't see any major positive change.
All right. Let me now discuss with you a real serious concern. And you alluded to this a little while ago, that people in Fiji have at this point in time. There is a belief that the coup culture has not been erased, and there is every likelihood that post elections there could be some sort of interference. Now, the Fiji military's role, and I've discussed this in my programs a number of times, is enshrined in the 2013 Constitution under Section 131(2), where it is stated, it shall be the overall responsibility of the Republic of the Fiji Military Forces to ensure at all times the security, defense, and well being of Fiji and all Fijians. My question is to you, John, what are your views on this particular section of the Constitution and the powers and responsibilities provided to the military?
Sorry, that last part I missed. Sashi, could you repeat that last part?
I said, what are your views on this particular section of the Constitution and the powers and responsibilities provided to the military?
The powers provided is to, one is in regard to the security of the people of Fiji. That is not an empowerment for them to stage coups and take over government. And that's why getting rid of the coup culture and military's role in national development, provision of security are emphasized. There's no indication whatsoever that the military should get involved in running of government by taking over government.
All right. So, how do we, in effect, get rid of the coup culture? What is the prime aim there? What should be done? You've talked about
There's-
military being developed, military being involved in sort of national development.
Yes, since we have a military, the important focus there in the discussions at that time was, what should the military be doing instead of this large number of paid people pretty much doing nothing, other than going and serving in the peace forces overseas. So that's why this indication that they should get involved in community development, national development, support service activities. But maybe it's the people of Fiji to decide. There should be a discussion: does Fiji need a military?
All right. Okay, have a little break. You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest today is Mr. John Samy, former Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Economic Development, Planning, Trade, Industry and Tourism. Please like and follow and share the SSTP page if you can. All right, let's move to some economic and social challenges of current times. What do you think are the major areas or issues of concern that is of significant concern, rather, to the population of Fiji now?
Overall, I think the level of poverty has to be a very, very major concern. People need to be able to have a decent basic living, access to quality infrastructure. Infrastructure has been collapsing. The need to stimulate investment, grow the economy, and create more opportunities for people to get productively involved in the overall national development process.
When
And
sorry, yeah, go on.
yeah, and what is very much regretted is that the trend has been on the other direction, adverse.
Okay. Earlier, you said that the current establishment have lost the plot. Now, if the current establishment have lost the plot, how realistic a chance do we have of the current government addressing significant issues such as roads, infrastructure? We have power supply disruptions on a daily basis. We have water supply disruptions, healthcare facilities.
Healthcare.
Yeah. How do we expect this government to address that if you say that they've lost the plot?
Yes. I would just want to go and further elaborate on your question. Is that if based on looking back to look forward, we can look back at the track record since 2006 of Bainimarama and his governments.
Mm-hmm.
We can even go beyond that, go before that, and look at the track record of the governments that we've had.
All right. Well, this government have been there for 15, 16 years.
The country, but the country as a whole, when you look at the track record of the governments that we've had, the people have got to rise up to this situation and ask themselves, the people of Fiji, ordinary people of Fiji, what is wrong? Instead of just look upon the government to do things and the government fails to do it, and accountability and so on, people have got to start breathing life into those words instead of sitting back and just expecting. And so I would like to suggest, and I wanted to say this in my concluding remarks, but you carry on, and then I'll make this point that I want to make in my concluding remarks.
I will definitely give you an opportunity to make your concluding remarks, John. Now, John, you have in your career held posts that relate to economic planning, etc. You've been policy advisor in very, very high posts. Fiji's current debt level is around the $9 or $10 billion mark. Do you think Fiji's current debt level is sustainable?
No.
Would you like to elaborate? Yes.
When you run that level of debt, you have to repay. You have to generate the capacity to be able to repay. That generation of capacity has been shortcoming, seriously. And if you continue to borrow more, then you get into a perilous situation. So the short answer to your question is it is not sustainable.
And as you've probably heard, and I hate saying this because I've done this a number of times on my program, the Minister for Economy, the Attorney General, wearing all his hats, always talks about smart borrowing. In your economic experience, with the wealth of experience and positions you've had, tell me, do you subscribe to smart borrowing?
Well, it depends who you are borrowing from. And multilateral institutions, in my experience, have been beginning to get a lot more rigorous in looking at what kind of lending, what productivity, implementation, all those things. But there's a limit to how much they themselves can do to get things moving in the right direction. Within the country, particularly, and I've stressed this to the current leader of Fiji's government a number of times, is what is extremely important is getting things done. Implementation, results-based implementation. So, if you're borrowing, and you're putting that money to good productive use, that is not necessarily a bad thing, even though you'll be under pressure to have to pay. But that critical thing is lacking. I had in 2008, 2009, mentioned to the Prime Minister that the government service, civil service and so on, serious capacity constraints, because over the years they've lost a lot of people, trained, qualified people, and there's a lot of inertia also within the public service in getting things done. So that needs to be sorted, to be fixed. Again, raises questions of effective leadership.
Yes.
There's a whole raft of things.
On the subject of effective leadership, towards the first half of our program today, you alluded to effective leadership. And when we asked about, I think, the possibility of a change of government or something, what are your views? What are your concerns about a change of leadership?
Well, this is where the people at large come in, and they need to reflect, look back on the experience to date, and be very particular about what kind of leaders they will vote for uh, if there is to be change and if there is change. And for my part, when I'm looking at Fiji currently on the political map, it does not look very joyful in regard to options.
So are you saying that currently there's nobody who could be a viable alternative leader for Fiji?
To me, it doesn't come forward in a very strong way at the moment. It doesn't. There are a number of them making interesting speeches, but overall, I'm concerned about what are the alternatives. But looking at the track record of the Bainimarama governments to date, there is a need for change, but not change for its own sake, but in materially significant ways that will make a difference going forward.
All right. So you've said there's a need for change. And in terms of leadership, you reserve your judgment on that.
In regard to the ones lining up to contend for power.
All right, John, as we head to the home stretch.
I know some of them, but I don't know all of them. So maybe in there, there. The other thing I wanted to mention is that maybe there should be a discussion about a government of national unity.
Well, as they say, all five fingers aren't even. You know, there's different egos at play. There's different wants of power, I guess, and that would, in fact, be the ideal situation if there was a government of national unity that could take forward the country and put it on a wonderful keel. John, as we head to the home stretch, I want to raise an unpleasant situation that you faced. I understand you faced some nasty accusations or allegations regarding theft. This was in relation to an alleged incident at Nandi Airport. What was that about? And would you like to clear the air on that once and for all?
I had cleared there at the time because I was sitting there in the lounge at the airport and I picked out my little bag that I had actually bought in Bangladesh, in which I kept my money. And I went to get a cup of coffee, came back, and I left it there inside my bag. And then I went to the comfort room, came back, sat down, was reading something, and then suddenly the police came and wanted to search my bag. And when they took out this bag, which was I thought was my bag, the small bag with the money, it wasn't. It was somebody else's. How it got into my bag and my bag disappeared. So later I was told somebody put it in there.
All right. So it's a case of mistaken bag or whatever it was.
Yeah, but there was money in it, but it was not my money.
Okay.
And my bag I never found because it was gone, disappeared.
All right. Okay. I believe after all that you had gone through with the People's Charter, you were also instrumental in establishing the Fiji chapter of the Foundation for the Education of Needy Children, FENC. What was FENC about?
Yeah, in 2008, when we were working on the People's Charter, of course, one of the problems that struck me greatly was the level of poverty. And for my part, I felt that you don't solve the problem of poverty through handouts, through charity. You give people opportunity, let them get access to employment, income earning opportunities, etc. But those who are right at the bottom of the poverty ladder, the poorest of the poor, they desperately need help. So after I had come back mid-December upon the completion of the charter, in January 2009, I went back to Fiji and liaised with a number of people in the civil society, and did that Fiji visit about, I think, 4 times on this matter. And by October, we had set up this non-government, voluntary, cause-oriented organization to extend support to the poorest of the poor in Fiji. And I've been actually, that's since 2010, that has been the main reason for me to go to Fiji several times in the year to attend to fence matters. And last year, we provided support to just over 6,500 children.
Wow,
From
that
the
is
poor.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So, is it fence or is it fank?
We call it Fence Fiji.
Fence Fiji.
Yeah.
Well, hats off to Fence Fiji. Continue the good work you're doing. And if you've served 6,500 very needy, or as you say, the poorest of the poor, well done. Hats off to you.
Yes.
Now, John, if people want to
Just
read your book,
sorry, Sashi, just before you go on to the next one, I just wanted to say that it would be great if our Fiji people who are living in Australia, New Zealand, in the States and Canada, if they're able to come forward and contribute even whatever they can through to Fence for us to further uplift the work that we've been doing for the poorest of the poor. Mobilizing funding support has not been easy.
sure. All right, as I said, we're coming to the home stretch. One very important question that I want to ask you. Given when you engaged yourself in the Fiji People's Charter project, if I can call it that, when you engaged yourself, you obviously must have subscribed or believed in the motives of Mr. Mbani Marama in carrying out his 2006 coup. It says in your book he set out to do a cleanup campaign. Turn the clock forward now. What is your views in terms of the coup that was conducted? Do you think he did achieve what he set out to do, or it has totally just changed for other things?
He in 2009, 2010, even to 2011, he did do a number of things arising out of the charter. I'll give you two examples. One is identity, common name for all. Fiji-born people are now called Fijians. Indigenous people are called Itokes. There was a working group with a majority Itoke members in it, and they came overwhelmingly indicating, recommending this should be done. And Bani Marama did that in 2009.
No. Stop there. With all due respect to you, okay? I want you to stop there. My question was, Bani Marama set out to clean the country of corruption. That's what he set out to do. And when the People's Charter process came in, you, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, followed the agenda that he had set. Your heart was sold that he was a man who conducted a coup which is supposed to clean up the country. Am I right on that?
No, his cleanup campaign had a list of headings. He did not have any of the details.
Generally, wasn't it? Generally, wasn't it? Generally,
the point
it
I'm trying to make is that unlike the 1987 and 2000 coups, which were race-based, get rid of the Indians, Bani Marama came with totally different reasons. So he said why he did the coup, but he did not have any details. And the roadmap that they generated in 2007 was pretty shallow. And when I saw it, I sent my inputs. And when I resent it to Chaudhary after seeing their roadmap, Bani Marama's roadmap, and I said, look, after I've sent this to you, my mind is in overdrive, thinking about how to make this happen. But if you folks are not interested, so be it. And that's when I went and met Bani Marama for the first time. So the point I'm trying to make is that they did not have the details. But in the charter, in the SNE report, we provided a whole raft of details about going forward, getting things done. and there's not been the kind of
You
implementation.
are not answering my question, and let's not beat around the bush. I'm not going to banter you into this. My question was quite simple: that do you now believe that the motives Vorengem Bainimarama had to execute the coup of 2006 was genuine, or was it not genuine?
Genuine. He
Okay,
believed he was genuine. I say so in my book.
right. So the motives you believe were genuine.
Yes.
Given the time that we've had now, since that coup to now 16 years, well, coming on to 16 years in December, 15 years, do you think he was honest in his intentions? Because in your letter, you call them all corrupt.
Over time, things happen, people change. So I don't agree with the way you're looking at it. You're saying in 2006, did he believe, da, 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 and I'm saying to you, he genuinely believed in a number of things he did.
Well,
But
I
then
accept that.
over time, there've been developments. That's why I wrote in June to him. I went and saw him, and Archbishop and I jointly wrote to him and said all those things that you've pointed out.
Well, I
Which means
totally accept.
yeah, and so yeah, it's on record.
All right, great. I totally accept what you say, that you genuinely believed in that right at the beginning, perhaps through the middle processes, but by 2011 November, you had changed your mind, and
Yes,
that is the strength of the letter that you sent.
yeah, and
All
and
right.
I was actually very frank in conveying the message to him.
Yes, and when I read that letter of November 2011, I can see in no uncertain terms that perhaps under your authorship, you've spelled it out very, very clearly what your thoughts were, because you haven't minced your words in that.
Yeah.
All right, John, if people want to read your book, The Fiji People's Charter, My Role on a Better Fiji for All, where can they lay their hands on that?
There is a web version now. I could make that available, and I could make that available to you also. You could put it on your website. But since you mentioned that, I would really like to urge people in Fiji, particularly the younger generation, to read it, and in particular read the report that the National Council for Building a Better Fiji had submitted to the President of Fiji on the People's Charter in the SNE report. I also have not a web version, but I have a soft copy of the State of the Nation and Economy report. If somebody emails me, I'll email it to them.
Yeah, I noticed somebody asked for your email address. Are you willing to share your email address, John?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, so what's your email address?
Oh, I thought you had. It's Samy PDSI, SAMY PDSI @gmail.com.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you give me the link to your web version of the Fiji People's Charter, I will put that on the SSTP page, and I will also put your email contact on that page.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, John, what is your message or closing remarks to our viewers today?
No, you see, in the last few pages of the People's Charter, there's a section called commitments and pledge. And there are some very critical words there that the people who endorsed the charter embraced. And so my very short summary concluding point is that, we live when we breathe. And I'd like the people of Fiji, who had embraced the charter, and particularly the younger generation, they were too small at that time, to breathe life into their People's Charter for Change, Peace and Progress, commitment and pledge, and begin to translate that into deliverables, into action.
All right, and any other remarks, or you've
The
said it
other,
all?
I suppose, being been in development for so long, I just wanted to say that As a small nation, Fiji, we are part of the global community of nations, and we are very much affected by the developments which take place externally. We are not cocooned, we are part of that global economy. Now, in the globe, the most dominant development model or system is marked by very rapid technological innovation and advancement, particularly in recent decades. And all of this is viewed as progress. But what is important to note is that this mode of progress has been generating increasing inequality, unemployment, and underemployment. And it is not sustainable over the longer term. And I'll give you New Zealand as an example.
Mhm.
Beautiful country, well known for the quality of development and its egalitarianism and reform-oriented governance. I'm talking about New Zealand. However, in recent years, there was one book written describing New Zealand as a country that has been undeveloping, meaning going towards the developing country direction. And in the New Zealand of today is characterized by a very high incidence of child poverty, homelessness, and greatly increased dependency on handouts, on social welfare, on the dole. I make that point because in regard to the way forward challenges that we all face, people at all levels, at the level of the individual, at the level of the family, at the level of communities, they need to become much more involved and proactively active in making sure that there is what is called progress in equity and values based development, because there's been a lot of pressure on that, breakdown of families, becoming nuclear, stuff like that.
John,
Mm,
you, John, you've answered like a typical bureaucrat. You've answered like a typical civil servant. I take those points. Um, from your heart, what's your closing remark in terms of Fiji, our beloved Fiji? What would you like to see happen in Fiji in the short to medium term?
yeah.
Speak from your heart.
No, speak from my heart. I think we really need to make serious progress in getting people out of the poverty trap.
Mhm.
A lot of people, the last you mentioned 50% several times. I had somebody mention 60%.
Mhm.
And that is a very, very major problem. And there is one thing I put a finger on is that, and for that you need to grow the economy, you need to give people access to opportunity, and all those things follow. That's
Wonderful.
again a typical bureaucratic answer, right?
That's not a bureaucratic answer. It's a very smart academic answer, and it's from
Again,
the heart. And it's from the heart. That's important. And in terms of governance, where does Fiji go in terms of governance of its people?
I mentioned to you, we've discussed this at length already today. The things have fallen in place as we thought they would within the People's Charter framework. We need accountable leadership, effective good governance, just governance. There's a lot of improvement still needed.
Well said. All right, Mr. John Samy, you've appeared in the SSTP program for the very first time. Um, do you have any closing remarks on today's interview on SSTP?
No, I thank you for the opportunity and for being so frank in the way in which you've posed questions to me and so on. So thank you so much.
John Samy, a big Vinaka Vakaleva to you. Thank you very, very much for being our chief guest in Sashi Singh's Talking Point today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you as chief guest. I thank you for discussing the People's Charter with us, what could have been, I guess, And I thank you for your frank views and responses to my questions, and that has been most welcome. John, thank you once again. I've taken your Sunday afternoon in New Zealand, and I wish you have a very blessed Sunday.
Thank you also. All the
Thank you
best.
very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
John.
Yeah.
That was our episode 26. And for the record, let me once again state, for the sake of transparency, that those people who constantly ask me to interview the Fiji First Party, I have, and I say it again and again, we have invited them. The day they accept the invitation, we will let you know, and we will be happy to interview them. One of our viewers wrote a few times today, Sashi interviews Sodelpa. Yes, I've been in touch with Mr. Ngavoka, and he's organizing some of his troops and himself to appear on this show as well. Well, that is all for episode 26 this week. SSTP, of course, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. A big thank you to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today. To my SSTP team, a very big thank you as well. And to you, our viewers, it won't happen without you. So I say a big thank you and Vinaka Vakalevu to you for being part of our program. In terms of our chief guest for next week, I haven't had it confirmed as yet. And if you watch the SSTP page, we will confirm that as soon as we have a confirmation, either today or tomorrow. So you'll have to watch the SSTP page for announcement of what is, or rather who is going to be our next guest. So until next week, have a very safe and a happy week. And in closing, I leave you with this quote from Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln said, "Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under the rule of a just God cannot long retain it. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under the rule of a just God cannot long retain it." That quote from Abraham Lincoln. Well, that's it for episode 26 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Till the next program, I am Sashi Singh, bidding you all goodbye, namaste, and ni samode. Goodbye, world. God bless.